Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Imam Shafi, the codifier of legal reasoning in Islamic jurisprudence, by Majid Khadduri. The Islamic legal theory, the Sharia, is derived from a high divine soul, embodying God's will and justice. Unlike positive law, it is regarded as the ideal legal order, but like positive law, it mirrors the character of the society in which it developed. The idealization of the Sharia as the perfect legal system was the product of legal speculation which occupied the minds of jurists for generations. But the one who for the first time laid down a systematic legal reasoning for such an idealization is Muhammad bin Idris al-Imam Shafi. The impress of his systematic method, which has never been superseded in Islam, has remained permanent. The place occupied by Imam Shafi in Islamic legal history is determined largely by the character of the age in which he lived. In a later age, once the gate of ijtihad, that is personal reasoning, had closed, he would have been a great jurist with a moderate view as to the development of the law. But in his age, a great jurist was necessarily drawn into ikhtilaf, that is disagreement, or the controversy between the schools of tradition and personal opinion. What was to be the position of tradition and personal opinion? What was to be the position of tradition in relation to the Quran and other sources of law? What was to be the position of opinion and analogy in relation to the Quran and tradition? At a time when scholars were raising questions, a man profoundly learned in the tradition and passionately convinced of its significance was compelled to take part in the controversy between the advocates of tradition and the advocates of opinion in order to defend the former's claim to supremacy. At first, Imam Shafi aroused those in favor of tradition, giving them leadership and supplying methods of defense against the advocates of opinion. Later on, after settling in Egypt, Imam Shafi seemed to have felt more strongly the need to strike a balance between the two schools of thought, and he sought to find a common ground of agreement. Imam Shafi's life. It was in this milieu that Imam Shafi played so significant a role in resolving the conflict between the two schools of law. Growing up in the Hijaz, the home of tradition, he became a follower of Malik and then went to Iraq, where he was exposed to the legal reasoning of the Iraqi jurists. In the later part of his life, in Egypt, where he could reformulate his legal opinions with detachment and rewrite his book, he founded a new school of law by synthesizing the two other schools. Shafi's career falls, therefore, into three well-marked periods. The first, the period of apprenticeship, begins with the study of the law in Mecca and Medina, where he was given a thorough training in the tradition and extends to his deportation to Iraq. The second, in which he was exposed to the legal reasoning of the Iraqi jurists, ends with his departure for Egypt. And the third, last from his settlement in Egypt, where he became the master to his death. A number of biographical accounts of Imam Shafi have come down to us, although the very earliest are apparently lost. Even in biographical sketches written by Dawood al-Jahiri and Zakaria bin Yahya Usaji, reproduced in later accounts, a great deal of legend had already crept into the story of Safi's life. The chronology presents great difficulty, as the conflicting narrative about Safi's visit to Iraq and his return to Medina indicate. The earliest authorities disagree as to whether Imam Safi was born at Gaza, a small provincial town on the Mediterranean Sea, or at Ascalon, a larger town not far away, in the year 150 after Hijrah, that is 757 Common Era. Probably Safi's mother, shortly after Safi's father died, spent some time in Palestine among the Yemenite tribe to whom her ancestors belonged, the Azd tribe. Before she and her son arrived at Mecca, for the authorities state that Imam Safi was scarcely 2 years old when he left Gaza, but that he had reached his 10th year when he arrived at Mecca. We know little about Safi's early life, except that he was brought up in Mecca in poor circumstances and that from his youth he was devoted to learning. Traditional stories, legendary for the most part, give an account of his early devotion to poetry, chivalry, and the legal studies. Such traditions have him learning the Quran by heart at the age of 7, committing Malik al-Muwatta to memory at the age of 10, and being declared fit to give legal opinion at the age of 15. Certain facts about his parentage may conceivably have affected the future course of his life. His father belonged to the tribe of Quraysh, the tribe of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and his grandfather Al-Muttalib, who was a brother of Muhammad's grandfather. The descendants of Al-Muttalib took an active part on both sides in the struggle between Muhammad and the Meccans, but they all supported Muhammad after his first victory at Badr in 2nd after Hijrah, corresponding to Common Era 624. This history may have given Imam Safi prestige arising from his belonging to the tribe of the Prophet and from his great-grandfather's kinship to the Prophet. It also may have inspired him with the idea that to him was bequeathed the mantle of the Prophet's tradition and that he should stand to defend it. These facts made him, like other descendants of the same clan, a beneficiary of the Prophet's share of 1/5 of the spoils of war. After spending some time among the Bedouins, Imam Safi returned to Mecca to study law under Muslim bin Khalid al-Ajjanji, Mufti of Mecca, Sufyan bin Uyayna, and others. Although he was declared qualified to practice law by Ajjanji, Imam Safi desired further legal training and set out to study under the leading jurist of the Hijaz, Malik bin Anas. He was probably 20 years old when he left Mecca for Medina. There are several accounts of how Imam Safi became the disciple of Malik. The traditional story is that he went to the governor of Medina, armed with a letter of introduction from the governor of Makkah and requested an audience with Malik. After hesitation, the governor made his way to Malik out in the company of Imam Safi. Malik seems to have been impressed by Safi's intelligence, and he allowed him to read Al-Muwatta under his guidance. As a follower of Malik, Imam Safi remained in Medina until Malik's death, by which time he had already gained distinction as a brilliant jurist. Imam Safi had the good fortune to attract the attention of the governor of Al-Yaman, who was on a visit to the Hijaz and who was impressed by his learning and industry. He helped Imam Safi to enter the service of the state at about the age of 30 and to rise rapidly in it. This service was short-lived, however. Imam Safi proved to be a just administrator, but he was soon entangled with local interests and factional jealousies, which brought him not merely dismissal from his post, but also deportation in Sindh to Iraq on the alleged charge that he was a secret follower of the Zaydi Imam Yahya bin Abdullah, a pretender to the caliphate and an opponent to the ruling dynasty in Baghdad. Imam Safi appeared before Caliph Harun al-Rashid at Al-Raqqa with other conspirators in 187 after Hijrah, corresponding to 803 Common Era. The other conspirators were put to death, but he was pardoned when he eloquently defended his loyalty to the Caliph on the ground that he was the descendant of a great-grandfather who was related to the great-grandfather of the Caliph himself. Some authorities state that the famous Hanafi jurist Muhammad bin al-Hasan al-Shaybani, who was present at the court when Imam Safi appeared before the Caliph, defended him and said that he was a well-known student of the sacred law. Most authorities agree that the Caliph was delighted with Safi's conversation and became his patron. This incident brought Imam Safi into close contact with Shaybani, whose book he had copied, and impelled him to devote the rest of his career to legal studies, never again to seek government service. The contact with Shaybani's circle had a great impact on Safi's legal reasoning. Until that point, as a follower of Malik, he had been exposed to the teaching of only one school of law. He had, it is true, known of the opinion and argument of the Iraqi jurists, but he had not heard them at first hand. We are told that he took an active part with Hanafi jurists in discourses and arguments, that he strenuously defended Malik's position, and that he seemed to have earned the reputation of being the upholder of tradition for his effort to establish the supremacy of tradition. But those discussions must have made him aware of the weakness of the Maliki school, which Imam Safi began to appreciate after settling in Egypt, as well as the points of strength in the legal reasoning of the Iraqi jurists. Some authorities stress the difficulties encountered by him in his argument with the Hanafi jurists, and one declared that Imam Safi was driven out of Iraq by them. Most authorities, however, believe that Hanafi followers complained to Shaybani of Safi's criticism, but that Imam Safi, though avoiding a stand against Shaybani directly, determined to stand on his own in his legal reason. Some authorities state that Shaybani, upon hearing the complaint of his followers, invited Imam Safi to debate on the points of difference between them. They also state that Imam Safi emerged triumphant over Shaybani, although Hanafi sources insist that Imam Safi was defeated. These circumstances must have been difficult for Imam Safi, who, as a protege of Shaybani, may have tried honestly to avoid an open conflict with him, as some authorities indicate. Nor was Safi's position strong enough to take an open position against Shaybani, an influential man at the court and his followers. This uncomfortable situation must have influenced Imam Safi in the decision to leave Iraq in 188 after Hijrah, corresponding to 804 Common Era, and to settle elsewhere. He went via Harran and Syria to Makkah, where he had begun his early legal study. As a disciple of Malik, he was well received and began to lecture at the sacred mosque. His teaching, however, revealed unexpected differences with Malik, for his thorough grasp of the Maliki and Hanafi legal opinion made him aware of the shortcomings of both. He made a deep impression on many students of law, including Ahmad bin Hanbal, who was studying in Makkah at that time, but his influence in the Hijaz must have been limited. His departure from Malik opinion disappointed many a Maliki admirer at a time when Imam Safi had not yet won the reputation of the master. Imam Safi returned to Baghdad in 194 after Hijrah, corresponding to 810 Common Era. His legal reasoning had matured and his stature as a jurist had grown sufficiently to permit him to follow an independent line of legal speculation. It was during this period that he accumulated the material for the legal system that was destined to leave so deep a mark upon Muslim law. After a span of 3 or 4 years, Imam Safi decided to leave Baghdad for Egypt. It is not quite clear why he made this decision. The authorities state that while in Baghdad he attached himself to Abdullah bin Musa, who invited him to settle in Egypt. We are told that the Caliph al-Ma'mun offered him the position of a judge, but he declined it. Safi's departure from Iraq took place in 1908 after Hijrah, corresponding to 814 Common Era. It was the same year that the Caliph al-Ma'mun established himself in Baghdad, having defeated his brother al-Amin a year earlier and inaugurated a regime in which rationalist philosophy of al-Mu'tazila assumed a predominant position. In 213 after Hijrah, corresponding to 827 Common Era, the Caliph officially proclaimed the doctrine of the creation of the Quran in opposition to the orthodox view of his eternal nature as coexisting with God. In 218 after Hijrah, corresponding to 833 Common Era, He decreed that no Qadi who did not subscribe to this doctrine could hold an office in the state, and an inquisition for the trial of those who rejected the doctrine was instituted. This anticipated atmosphere of intolerance to orthodox views. It has been suggested by a recent writer, drove Imam Safi to settle in Egypt. At the age of 50, Imam Safi seems to have made his final choice between his love for power and his love for the law, and he decided to settle in a place where he could concentrate on legal speculation in relative quiet, remote from the center of court interviews and on good terms with the governor of Egypt. Imam Safi found himself in a congenial position. During the 5 years he lived in Egypt, he devoted all his time to teaching and dictating his work to his students. We are told that his leading disciple Ar-Rabi bin Sulaiman al-Muradi, Abu Yaqub al-Buwaiti, and Abu Ibrahim Ismail bin Yahya al-Muzani, to mention but three, were in the habit of writing down Safi's spoken words, and that Imam Safi would correct the text when it was read aloud before him. Thus, Safi's disciples in Egypt were responsible for all of the books that are known to us now, whether copied or dictated from his original writing. Doubts have been raised as to whether some of Safi's writings, such as the Kitab al were not actually composed by a disciple. If some of his words have been changed, or rephrased, however, the content of the book must comprise Safi's own legal reasoning and idea. For Safi's biographers agree that his books were handed down to us as recorded by his students, and one of the students who wrote a summary, Muqtasar, agrees with Safi's fundamental opinion as recorded in his collected work. Imam Safi had difficulty persuading his opponent to accept his opinion. He followed an independent line of legal reason, often disagreeing with leading jurists, among them his great master Malik. The disagreement aroused Maliki's opponents, who presented themselves to his circle to take issue with him. But his great abilities as an attractive teacher and skillful debater silenced them. One authority asserts that in an argument with Fityan, a Maliki follower in Egypt, Imam Safi triumphed. But the intemperate loser, failing in persuasion, resorted to abuse. The governor, a patron of Imam Safi, ordered that Fityan be punished by being paraded through the streets of the city bearing a plank and stating that this was the penalty for abusing a descendant of the Prophet's near of kin. Enraged by this degrading punishment, Fityan's followers turned up upon Imam Safi after one of his lectures and resorted to violence. Imam Safi, badly injured, was taken to his house, where he died a few days later. The incident gives us a picture of the consequences which heated controversy between rival schools of thought could generate. It is possible that Safi's death was not caused entirely by his opponent's attack. Imam Safi was known to suffer from a serious intestinal illness, which kept him frail and ailing during the later years of his life. He died on the last day of Rajab 204, corresponding to 20th January 820 Common Era in Uttat, Old Cairo, and was buried in the vault of the Banu Abdul Hakam near Mountul Muqaddam. Safi's personality and character. Tradition paints Imam Safi as a handsome man who paid attention to his appearance. When his hair turned grey in later years, he was in the habit of dyeing it dark red. He was tall and slender with an attractive face and a pleasing voice. He was a man of impressive personality, respected for his straightforwardness and revered for his piety. Although a man of meager resources, gaining little remuneration from his study of the law, he was generous with his friends as well as with the poor. That generosity became the favorite theme of many later biographers, who described him as giving away to the poor everything that his hands had acquired. His will shows his concern for the emancipation of his slaves as well as for the welfare of all his relatives and associates. From early childhood, Imam Safi seems to have displayed a sharp intelligence and a good memory. We are told that at an early age he had memorized a great deal of ancient Arab poetry in addition to the Quran and Malik al-Muwatta. Eloquent in speech and an expert in the Arabic language, his interest in poetry and language preceded his interest in law. Only when he was reminded, as one authority puts it, that it was more dignified to become a jurist than a poet, did he turn to the study of the law. Whether or not this story was invented afterwards to account for Safi's legal pursuit, he did grow up in a center where the legal profession tempted many a Muslim scholar. He certainly chose a field in which he distinguished himself not only as a great thinker and a skillful jurist, but as an expositor of the Sharia without equal. Although the study of law was Safi's main concern, his early biographers state that he was acquainted with other branches of Islamic learning. Later biographers tend to depict him as a scholar whose knowledge was encyclopedic. One of these stories, related by al-Balawi, paints him as discussing with Caliph Harun al-Rashid in his first audience with that caliph. Almost every conceivable branch of knowledge, including Greek medicine and philosophy in their original language. The early sources of his life give the impression that he was opposed to theology and prohibited discourse on it in his presence. His single-mindedness and straightforwardness prompted him to stay above factional differences and personal jealousy. Nor was he ready to compromise with the fellow members of his profession. He did not shrink from showing disagreement with the Hanafi jurists in Iraq, despite Saiban's intercession with the Caliph to secure his pardon, because Safi's differences with Hanafi doctrine were genuine legal differences. When he lectured afterward in Medina, he showed just as much legal disagreement with Maliki followers, although he never ceased to pay high tribute to his great master Malik. He betrayed perhaps a certain inflexibility in his relation with rival Poole because he maintained so high a standard of legal reasoning that his disagreement with others appeared sharp and uncompromising. He was too much of a scholarly perfectionist for his contemporaries. Tradition also depicts him as a great debater who emerged triumphant from every argument with his rival. Ibn Abdul Hakam, one of his disciples in Egypt, pays high tribute to the ability of his master in the art of defeating his critics. The Maliki jurisdiction, it will be recalled, resorted to violence because his tongue failed him when he sought to challenge Shafi's persuasive argument. Although Hanafi jurists reject Shafi's ability to withstand a discussion with Shaybani, early accounts state that Imam Shafi conducted debate with Hanafi jurists with great skill. Both the Risala and the Kitab bear witness to Shafi's scholastic ability in pursuing an argument to its logical conclusion. A great portion of the Risala is, in fact, written in the form of a debate between Imam Shafi and an interlocutor, who, in most cases, is a distinguished is a who in most cases is a disguised critic of Shafi's doctrine. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.